questions to be concrete and to the point so that we can answer the most numbers of questions. We have another one by fax. Must a change be made in the structure of the organization before beginning to work with a new focus?
Good question. Generally, no. But it is very important to remember that the objective of benchmarking is change, that it is an objective setting process. The purpose is to gain insights into how I can improve my operations to gain a more superior position. And if I'm not prepared to make changes in the operation, then the gathering of the data is just basically a waste of time. So yes, there will be changes or within the structure, perhaps, certainly within the operation, but that doesn't necessarily precede the acquisition of the data.
Sí. Esta pregunta tiene una segunda parte.
This question has another part.
¿Puede benchmarking
Can benchmarking help
planea una alianza estratégica de dos empresas
when a union of two companies is being planned in different countries?
a través de las fronteras?
Can it work across barriers and frontiers?
Yeah, most certainly. Benchmarking, by and large, began in Japan in a formal sense. We learned much of what we do in benchmarking by benchmarking initially in the 70s, predominantly companies in Asia. Since that time, we and other companies like IBM and Motorola, Federal Express, etc., maintain benchmarking partnerships and relationships all around the globe. So it certainly crosses boundaries.
Tenemos una llamada del Instituto.
We have a call from the Technological Institute.
Vamos a darles la oportunidad de que hagan sus preguntas.
Let's
Sigan.
see.
Adelante, México.
Bueno.
Sí, le estamos escuchando. ¿Quiere hacer su pregunta?
Sí. Básicamente, ¿cómo se puede aplicar
How can you apply benchmarking
a empresas de servicios
to a company, a service company, especially a company in telecommunications?
Benchmarking, as I said, I think is applicable to certainly any kind of organization and to almost any kind of operation. The key is identifying specifically what it is you want to improve, what process you want to improve, and whether or not those processes are performed only by people in your own industry. There is a telecommunications cooperative on benchmarking, the contact of which I can't think of it exactly this moment, but by and large it was established by General Electric, and that's sort of a standing group of people who meet and share information. So yes, it can work in your industry and almost any. Keep in mind also that the best practices may not necessarily be performed by people in your own industry, and you may want to look to outside of your own industry into other practices, as was mentioned on the tape, LL Bean.
Gracias, señor Finnigan. Gracias.
Thank you. We have another call. Technological Institute.
México. Adelante. Bueno, vamos a esperar nuevamente la
Let's wait for the call for the person who wants to ask the question. We have another one by fax.
Dice, ¿qué valores organizacionales y
What organizational values and personal values are affected or favored when a company is involved in benchmarking?
Armando, I'm not exactly sure I know what is meant by values, but let me make an attempt and see if this helps. To be successful, organizations who enter into benchmarking have to trust one another. To help do that, it's important that the participants or the partnering companies maintain the highest standards of not only personal values but ethics, and certainly recognize and stay within the legal practices of their own countries. And when you do that, then you can be confident that you can trust one another, and you can therefore be confident that the information you receive is going to be accurate and not misused.
Tenemos una
thermal uso.
llamada más del Instituto Tecnológico.
Another call from the Technological Institute in Morelia. The question is, can you apply with success benchmarking in Mexico, and how much time would it take?
The answer to the first question is yes, and there are numerous examples, both with Xerox of Mexico, with Ford, Pemex, a number of organizations in Mexico are using benchmarking now as a means of establishing strategic goals for themselves. How long will it take? To get started on benchmarking requires that the people who participate go through some basic training. In a little while I'll explain why that's so important. After that investment, and you understand a process, then it's a question of practice and putting it to practice. A typical benchmarking study from beginning to end can last anywhere from 6 months to a year. And from beginning to end, I mean from the identification of partners, the negotiations of arrangements, the gathering of data, the analysis of it, and the development of action plans and their implementation. How long does it take for an organization to internalize benchmarking as a process that they're going to use long term? That is absolutely going to require the commitment of the senior management of the organization. And so I guess I would say that it will take as long as it takes for that management to buy into the process as one that they want to use.
Gracias, señor Finnigan. Una llamada final antes de la siguiente.
Another question
Viene del Instituto Tecnológico de Tepic.
from the Technological Institute.
Adelante, Gámez.
¿Qué relación?
What relation?
Sí, le estamos escuchando. Siga.
Quiero hacerle una pregunta al señor expositor del Instituto Tecnológico de Tepic. Quiero preguntarle qué relación tiene
What relation is there?
con
Is there between
con
benchmarking
la cultura de calidad para implementarse
and total quality
de servicio?
in the service businesses?
Excellent question. I don't think the answer I'm going to share with you is applicable to the service industry, but it's also applicable to the manufacture or the production of products, virtually any kind of work process. If you can think about total quality as the bringing together of really two major strategic elements, the first one being concepts of continuous improvement, the second being the involvement of employees, employee involvement, empowerment, or whatever, to work on issues that are going to improve the organization's position. What benchmarking provides is a more market-based focus on where those efforts ought to be placed, what should be worked on. So that I would go so far as to say that a total quality effort that does not comprehend benchmarking is not complete and is going to have much more difficulty at success than one that does engage benchmarking.
Gracias, señor Finnigan. Podemos recibir más preguntas durante
We can receive more questions in the next session.
Pero por lo pronto daremos paso a
We
la
will
segunda
now
parte de la exposición
continue with our
de
second
señor
part of the conference.
Recently, I had the opportunity to hear an address by the German board chief executive officer of the Ritz-Carlton Corporation, Horst Schulze. Ritz-Carlton is the international chain of luxury hotels which won the U.S. Quality Award last year. Mr. Schulze told of the advice his grandfather gave him when he was leaving home to become an apprentice chef. He was 16 years old and had never been away from home before. He said that his grandfather told him that he would have to learn to steal. To steal with your eyes, his grandfather told him, because no one would offer their help. They would be in competition with him for advancement. And since his formal education had ended, that he could only learn by watching others and repeating those things that were successful. He said, keep your eyes open and steal with them. During the last decade, as total quality management has surged through the manufacturing and service industries of the world, companies have learned that the power of TQM can improve the way they serve their customers and ultimately improve their competitive results. The continuous improvement of processes and products is their basic quality management approach. For many, however, continuous improvement has not led to the benefits that they expected. Many companies have spent valuable time and resources improving insignificant things without gaining a better competitive standing. They've thrown great effort into changes that aren't necessarily improvements at all. What they lack is a solution that merges strategic choices about what activity to be good at with what it means to be truly excellent in that activity. They need to learn to steal with their eyes. In this session, we will examine the relationship of benchmarking to total quality management and the pursuit of continuous improvement. In my opinion, companies that aspire to world-class status today cannot achieve it without benchmarking, because it is the best approach for guiding any continuous improvement process. Benchmarking lets us determine the most important things to improve and the best approaches for doing so. That is why 3 years ago, the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award Board of Examiners recognized benchmarking as a key quality tool and incorporated it in their award evaluation. The question is no longer whether TQM organizations should conduct benchmarking studies, but how they should conduct them. Quality improvement, that is, continuous improvement and customer satisfaction, and employee involvement are usually accepted as the two basic elements of total quality management. To effectively execute TQM, a company has to rally its employees to focus on continuous improvement efforts to achieve higher levels of customer satisfaction. But which continuous improvement efforts? That is where benchmarking comes in. Your business competitors are also focusing on continuous improvement to achieve higher levels of customer satisfaction. Gaining an advantage over these competitors is the mission of benchmarking, and that is why it should be a key element of any total quality strategy. It helps to understand the importance of benchmarking in total quality by focusing on work processes. First, quality is usually defined as meeting the customer requirements. This definition suggests that there is a customer and a supplier, that functional work processes are a chain of process connections consisting of an input to a process that produces the output. I provide an input to you, you add value, and pass it on to another. In that example, I am the supplier and you are the customer. I strive to meet your requirements. In adding value, you do so as a supplier for another customer. You now strive to meet their requirements. So just as every function has an input, a process, and an output, every function has customers and every function has suppliers. What benchmarking allows a function to do is to pursue becoming the best, a model customer and a model supplier, by looking at their own processes and their competitors' processes to determine what must be done to become the model. Again, the emphasis is on process. A model supplier knows what the customer wants and provides the most efficient processes for delivering what they want. A model customer assures that all internal processes work efficiently and that external suppliers deliver only what is necessary to assure that the outside customer's requirements are met. Benchmarking has become widely accepted as a useful quality tool due to the success of Xerox, who began studying competition as early as 1976. Owing to increasing competitive pressures and success, especially by Japanese companies, Xerox pioneered a formal benchmarking process in 1979. It was on the basis of the data gathered by this process that Xerox decided to pursue total quality and to begin establishing internal targets based on outside comparisons. The result is that Xerox not only managed to become more competitive, but by the mid-1980s, had recovered all of the market share that had been lost to the Japanese. Benchmarking was first started in Xerox's manufacturing operations in 1979 to examine its unit manufacturing costs. Comprehensive benchmarking was formalized with the analysis of copiers produced by Xerox's Japanese affiliate, Fuji Xerox, and later other Japanese manufactured machines. These investigations confirmed that our U.S. manufacturing costs were higher. In fact, some competitors were selling machines for what it cost us to make them. By 1981, benchmarking was adopted as a corporate-wide effort. At the 1983 annual meeting of shareholders, David Kearns, Xerox's chief executive officer, announced that his #1 priority was to achieve leadership through quality, and that benchmarking would lead the way by providing the targets to be met. Today, budgets and operating targets are based on assessments from outside the organization. This is an example of some of the benchmark companies Xerox currently uses. Note that not all are direct competitors. In considering how benchmarking supports efforts for continuous improvement, we should spend some time on the types of benchmarking activities that are available. There are 3 major types of benchmarking: internal, competitive, and functional. In many organizations, specific business practices are performed in more than one location, one department, one division, or even one country. Many organizations begin their benchmarking activities by comparing business practices internally. The company does not assume that it will discover best business practices in this effort. It is merely a starting point to begin to identify the best internal business practice in the organization. In other words, the benchmarking learning process begins at home. As an example, Xerox regularly benchmarks with our affiliates in Asia, Fuji Xerox, and Europe, Rank Xerox, as well as our manufacturing operations in Canada, Brazil, Venezuela, and Aguas Calientes, Mexico. Internal benchmarking assumes that there are differences in the work process of an organization as a result of differences in geography, local organizational history, the nature of managers and employees in different locations, and so on. Many organizations are able to realize immediate gains by identifying their best internal business practices and then transferring that information to other parts of the organization. Another approach involves identification of the products, services, and work processes of your organization's direct competitors. This information is valuable because your competitors' practice affect the perceptions of your customers, suppliers, shareholders, potential customers, and industry watchers, all of whom have a direct effect on your business success. Another advantage is that competitors use technologies and business practices that are the same or very similar to your own. You generally have much in common, and lessons learned from competitors can usually be transferred without a lot of translation. Very often, competitors are willing to join forces to participate in joint projects. The Telecommunications Benchmarking Consortium is an example, is made up of 18 companies, many of which are in direct competition with one another, like AT&T, Bell Atlantic, MCI, Ameritech, GTE. A single industry compensation study is another example. Functional or generic benchmarking involves the products, services, and work processes of organizations that may or may not be your direct competitor. The objective of functional benchmarking is to identify best practices in any type of organization that has established a reputation for excellence in a specific area. Functional should be applied broadly and can mean manufacturing, engineering, human resources, marketing, distribution, billing, payroll. The LL Bean story is the best example of successful functional benchmarking. But it is also an example of another advantage to functional benchmarking, the opportunity for breakthroughs. A breakthrough is an opportunity to discover a paradigm shift. By looking at organizations that are outside of your industry, you may find within that function an approach that might apply elsewhere in your organization. Let me give you an example. Xerox referred Federal Express to LL Bean. While visiting Bean, The Federal Express people discovered that they use barcoding to manage their warehouse inventory and to track shipments. From that study, the notion for tracking packages by barcoding was born. Because of Federal Express's success with barcoding, it soon migrated to the airlines for the tracking of luggage. There's yet another way to classify or think about the types of benchmarking, and that is to define benchmarking by three categories: performance, strategic, and process. The performance category includes all research-based studies of competitors and industry participants. This is research based on the analysis of trends from database searches and surveys. This approach requires the least amount of resource support because such performance studies can be conducted by an experienced research-oriented librarian or by market research. Strategic benchmarking is a way to focus on the potential changes in a business by examining non-industry companies for significant business trends. This is usually done by establishing alliances with a limited number of non-competing businesses. GE is probably the most successful proponent of this method. Strategic benchmarking requires a small professional team with long-term continuity. Again, a compensation study is a good example. Process benchmarking means seeking the best strategic practices by face-to-face studies and observations of the key business processes, regardless of who is the best practices candidate. Because process benchmarking requires the participation of subject matter experts, the owner of a process and the process team, the people who actually do the work, should be directly involved in conducting the study. For this reason, the process method requires the greatest investment. One helpful reason for thinking of the types of benchmarking this way, rather than just internal, competitive, and functional, is that it allows an organization to gradually build its benchmarking capability. You can start with performance benchmarking, which requires the least resources, then go to build partnerships with a set of companies to understand the strategic issues for your company. Incidentally, some of the companies you can solicit might include your suppliers and major customers. Finally, as your company becomes more capable at adapting benchmarking information, you can begin a team training program to help your work teams conduct their own process benchmarking studies. By now, you're probably asking, what's in it for my company? If we adopt benchmarking, what can we hope to accomplish? First and foremost, benchmarking is a goal-setting process. It is a means by which the practices needed to reach new goals are discovered and understood. After goal setting, these are probably the most basic fundamental outputs of benchmarking. Beyond the basic goal-setting objective of benchmarking, the motivational worth of benchmarking also is significant. When fully integrated into the responsibilities, work processes, and reward system of an organization, benchmarking empowers that organization to move forward to realistic goals and change their existing work practices. It legitimizes goals and targets by basing them on external facts and benchmark findings, marshal resources to concentrate on solving basic business practices and basic problems of the business through agreement on the best practices. When a cross-section of people in the organization, including those from the operational organizations, are involved in the benchmarking process, it focuses the attention of the entire organization on the correct business goals. Another way to think about what is in it for you, for your organization, is to focus on the specific benefits. There are many ways to describe the benefits of benchmarking to an organization, but the basic benefits are derived from meeting customer requirements, establishing fact-based goals, measuring true productivity, becoming competitive, and ensuring that best industry practices are included in work practices. I want to share with you a look at each of these 5 benefits from the point of view of the results you can expect with and without benchmarking. Remember our earlier discussion about customer-supplier relationships and thinking of your functions as an overall process made up of smaller processes? A function's effort to satisfy their end user's customer requirements is made up of many distinct internal processes. If these processes are focused only internally, then the needs of the end user customer will not be met. Only an external focus will assure that customer requirements are determined, documented, and eventually implemented. Benchmarking is the process for uncovering what those needs are by searching out best industry practices, which by definition are statements for more adequately meeting customer requirements. Understanding the work practices of industry leaders results in close conformance to what customers want, because best practices would not exist if they were not preferred by users or consumers. Benchmarking is an alternative to the traditional way of establishing goals and objectives. Benchmarking forces a continual focus on the external environment at all levels of an organization, not just the strategic direction, but at the work process level. Therefore, all functions and work units are attuned to the external world on a timely basis. There is no more credible basis for goals than their being based on the industry best, because this simple basis for goal setting ends all the internal target debates. If goals are based on the industry best, not only do they meet customer needs, they are also unarguable. True productivity comes when workers at all levels are solving real problems. That is, they are concentrating on understanding their outputs and how these satisfy the next-in-line users, or the ultimate customer. This happens when there is an appreciation of what the organization does well and an understanding of how other organizations do those things. Benchmarking is the process for obtaining this basic data and converting it into actions, which can produce true productivity. It is a proactive way of effecting change. The constant external focus and testing of ideas, methods, practices, and their incorporation in the plans and programs of the organization is a powerful approach for ensuring long-term competitiveness. To become competitive, one must certainly understand the competition, but also challenge the current way of doing business by bringing in new ideas and practices from the outside. These new practices can be used to build functional strategies and business plans that are later converted into commitments to resources and action plans in the budgeting cycle. This very process of the external search for strategic data and plan commitment is what ultimately results in becoming competitive. Often organizations do not change until the pain of competition is felt severely. That is potentially disastrous. By the time the pain is felt, either life-threatening surgery has to be performed, or the lead time to change doesn't permit catching up to the competition. With benchmarking, you can recognize the pain before it occurs. Benchmarking's greatest value is in learning about the practices used by others that are better than those currently in place internally. The outside findings are used to modify, improve, or adapt external practices to provide useful internal change and improve efficiency and effectiveness. It is a process to find a better way, rather than an attempt to reinvent the wheel. I believe the concentration on uncovering industry best practices through benchmarking is the best route to superior performance. Okay, if these are the benefits to the organization, what are the benefits for us, the managers who initiate the effort? First, benchmarking will enhance your own performance by letting you capture the best practices from other industries and incorporate them in your own operations. Second, it will provide your people who are involved in the benchmarking process a stimulation and motivation to improve because of their involvement, but also because of their increased awareness. This awareness will also work to break down the reluctance to change that is so common in our organizations. With these effects alone, any manager should be able to enjoy a more focused, active work group working on the right things. But benchmarking also provides the manager the possibility of gaining insight into a process or technology that could allow his operation or his company to make a significant breakthrough, like Federal Express and barcoding. And we can all use a little personal success now and then. And if we don't find the breakthrough we need, benchmarking is certain to establish a personal network that will offer the potential for future opportunities. It It is appropriate to ask, what does it take to be successful at benchmarking? Well, it certainly takes some resources, but mostly success will require three things. First, management, senior management, must be committed to participate and support the results. Two, the organization must be willing to make changes based on the data. And three, it will require skills. As I mentioned, overview sessions like this are helpful, but you will need some specific training as well. But how is benchmarking done? Let me share with you a process model for benchmarking. Benchmarking focuses on work processes and strives to understand the best practices. The focus on the practice allows the organization to understand what kind of gap there may be with an industry leader and what has to be done to close the gap. The metric or measure lets you know how great the gap is, where it is, and how often it shows up. We focus on the practice first rather than the measure, because if you only get the numbers and don't know what they mean or why they exist, then you haven't accomplished much. But with the practice understood and then measured, then management and the rest of the organization, the people who will have to implement the changes, can get behind the new goals. Employees will support the improvement effort because they have reliable external information on which to compare themselves and change their operations. And that will lead to superior performance. In the next segment, we'll look at how to implement this process.
Gracias, señor Finnigan.
Thank you, Mr. Finnigan. We continue with our question and answer session. We will hope and wait for the persons who are listening